So how did the hybridization start, and what is a reptilian hybrid in your view?
There has been normal hybridization for thousands of years, but how this particular program started was in the 1950s. There was a treaty signed with the American government and the Germans in space
Uh-huh.
that that 150,000 Americans would be provided every year to the Germans. And that was because they won the Battle of Operation High Jump.
Okay.
And the CIA was balking at this. And so they used the excuse that humans don't last very long. Draco are a higher energy being than humans are. And their normal means of communication is telepathic. And they can talk, and they despise having to talk to humans because when they practice their normal full intimacy telepathy, it fries our brains. We simply are not hardwired to handle it. So they have to make a special effort to communicate with us. And even doing that, being in the same room with one of them for an hour at most will kill a normal human. We're just not
Okay.
hardwired for their energy levels. So that was the excuse that the CIA came up with to modify the assets, that's what they call us, to modify us with Draco DNA so we could live with the Draco without falling over dead.
Uh-huh.
And there were some benefits to this for them. We were expected to have higher psionic abilities because of it. Normals, controls. When you do a science study, you have the people that you're working on and you have the normals or controls. So
Right.
normals have a certain percentage depending on their ethnic background. Some groups have more than others, but all humans have a percentage of people who are naturally gifted with higher psionic abilities. Historically, these people have been called witches. And we all know various religions have gone out of their way to eliminate these people. And so those particular ethnic groups have less than the rest. And so the CIA was specifically targeting the ethnic groups that have more than the rest and then shooting them up with Draco DNA.
Okay. So
Before we were born. So we had no, there are several religions in America who claim that we gave consent for this. There is no way in hell that an embryo is giving consent. I don't care what they think.
so how did that? Do you know how the procedure went? You said that this was before you were born. Did they take your mother, for example, somewhere on aboard a ship or on a base to do this?
I know that my mother has alters, which means that she has
Uh-huh.
been through mind fracture. Um,
Uh-huh.
I know that in the 50s, we had just gotten through World War II. We were in this paranoia about the Soviets, and I'm sure you had a similar paranoia about us.
Yeah, sure.
And so national security was the perfect excuse to get anybody to do anything. And so my impression, looking at documents and knowing what happened to me, is that they had certain women that they had chosen to follow. These were the test subjects. And their doctors were asked to report when they showed up pregnant. And so knowing what the signs of the Draco modifications are, I know at least 2 of my siblings have also been modified. But they didn't ask her. She knows nothing about this. You ask her about this and she will go off the deep end screaming that I'm insane. But she has at least 3 alters that I interact with on a regular basis, and 2 of them hate me. So family life gets difficult when the CIA intervenes. I imagine some of your people had the same problem with KGB. So they would call the woman in to the doctor's office and use whatever technology they had at the time to manipulate the embryo. I'm not sure exactly what they did, whether they took her to a ship or a base. I know we lived about 20 miles from a military base. It had been used a lot during World War II, but had been almost decommissioned. So there was still equipment and things. So it would not have been difficult to take her there. And I was the first child, so she had no little ones to have to worry about. So,
But how did you find out about this procedure? I mean, did you find out about this after you've entered the program, after a while, that you were hybridized, or how did you know that you were a hybrid and others were hybrids too?
I knew when I was on Mars. The Germans called me a Missgeburt. That translates into an abortion that lived.
Okay.
Because I was modified. And I've had commanders that just flat out called me a Draco. They said,
wow.
They said, you smell like a Draco, you act like a Draco, you're a Draco. You're just in an almost human body. As far as the Earth me finding out about it, I had a regression hypnosis in January 2015. I can't remember the exact date. There was a lady that was trained by Dolores Cannon, and she was in Tracy, and she accepted me for half her usual fee because I was on Social Security disability. And she's no longer doing those hypnosis things. She had too many issues with people freaking out afterwards. There are a lot of Americans who think they have a normal life and they have anomalies. And so they go and they have hypnosis, and they're not always happy with what they hear coming out of their own mouth. So then they attack the messenger. And that is part of our programming, is we attack the people who help us. So this has been a big problem in the online group that we have, because you'll reach a certain level and suddenly your programming will blow up. So
I see. Okay, so after you've found out in this Earth life that you've been hybridized, can you tell now about others that they have been like hybridized too? Are there any like physical? How does a person know if they have or haven't been shot with the Draco blood?
Okay. The first most obvious sign is that you have psionic abilities that normals don't. You'll hear other people's thoughts without trying. If you go into a crowded room, you're suddenly overwhelmed by the emotions everyone's feeling. And if there's someone that's sick, you will feel what they're feeling. So you might feel sick for a week afterwards just from being around them. You might be able to move small objects without realizing it. You think about it afterwards and you go, did I do that? I've known people who could levitate, not necessarily floating in air like you see the yogis do, but you know, walking about 2 inches off the floor. The first time I saw someone actually do that, I was like, oh my God. I didn't think that was possible.
Have you been levitating too?
I do not levitate real world. I have memories of levitating when I was in the space programs. I have not done, we call it here and now. I do not levitate here and now. I have moved things when I was scared. My biggest thing is I hear what other people think. I feel what they feel. I blow up electronics. That can start fires. And no, I'm not the one messing with our internet right now. I want it to work.
Okay, so the program takes according to the agreement they have, the program the Germans take 150,000 Americans every year, and all of these people are actually hybridized in some way.
Yes.
But you said that the Germans called you a Draco. That means they weren't hybridized. They weren't part of this whole idea. Okay.
The reason the Germans asked for so many people was they knew they did not have enough genetic diversity to maintain colonies. And they were hoping that these Americans would want to join them. Except they wanted 100% Terran human genetics. And the Draco edition made us unsuitable. So they were angry, viciously angry. And I don't know of any of us who were used in these programs that were not insulted for it. Miscabert is the usual name for us.
So they got kind of screwed in this program. They got what they wanted, but then the whole commodity, if you will, was basically contaminated.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly. The CIA was screwing them over on purpose, but with a rational excuse. So they got the product delivered, but not in a shape they could use for their intended purpose. And so that's one of the issues that the Germans in space have with the Americans. Every time they have actually trusted me, they've been screwed over. So there's a lot of mistrust. As a navigator in space, I had to be at least a lieutenant for that position. And I actually worked up to commander twice. And I would get in trouble for something Draco related and bumped back down. So I have multiple alters out there who are responsible for taking ships and even the whole armada into hyperspace together and making sure nobody's in a wall. We call it a bulkhead. Nobody's in a wall whenever that we come out, So I have their lives in my hands, and yet I'm constantly in trouble because Draco. And
Right.
it feels unfair to me because I didn't ask to be modified. So
Okay, this is an interesting point because what you said is that they modified the Draco. That was the Draco's idea to modify you guys.
no, it was the
Because
CIA's idea.
it was the CIA's idea. So the CIA was basically working with the Draco closer than the Germans at that point, right?
They got the DNA samples somehow.
And so how did that happen? Because a lot of people think now that the Draco and the Germans are sort of, one team. And then you have the CIA, which was, supposedly infiltrated by the Germans, and there you have the picture. But what you're saying is that the CIA was kind of separate in that way. It wasn't by any means hijacked by the Fourth Reich or whatever. And now we have, two sides, and now you have the Germans that are with the Draco, sort of, but not really. And then you have CIA working with the Draco and actually doing their own thing against the Germans. So how does that because you have the insight on this, and most people get the idea, this black and white kind of, the Germans didn't win the war, and then they infiltrated the paperclip, and that in the secret space program, and basically you have the CIA, which is a semi, rogue faction of the Fourth Reich. This is what most people think, but that doesn't sound like that's the case, right?
That's not the reality that I lived with. The reality that I lived with is that the Germans in space think they got a raw deal from the Draco. And they have been trying to separate themselves from them ever since, to varying degrees of success. The colonies that the Germans have in space are pretty much Draco free. The military still is hand in glove with the Draco. And that's a very big difference. Okay. People also think that this is a linear thing, that the Germans have only been there since the 1940s, and it can only be so many people there. Well, when you are doing hyperspace, you are also time traveling. And some of the colonies are 400 years old because of that. So there are some incredibly developed planets with 400 years of German occupation.
Amazing.
They have traveled back in time on Earth and picked up their own people who would have died in plagues or wars or genocides and popped them into space. Because they have the capability of bringing people back from the dead and healing their diseases, they have picked up plague victims, tossed them into the regeneration, brought them back to life, and used those in their colonies. So these are not all Nazis. That's a major, major misconception. This was Teutonic Knight aristocracy who were running this. And no, they're not any nicer than the Nazis.
Right. So some people wouldn't know the difference if they looked at them.
But they're not any nicer. They're not any more polite. They are definitely, we are the boss, and you guys are a second-class citizen, especially those of us who were shot up with Draco.
If the Germans weren't modified, they didn't modify themselves, right?
Right.
To work side by side with the Draco. How did they, because you said that a person cannot basically tolerate being near the Draco for very long. How did they manage to, serve with them? Because according to the general story right now, the Draco and the Germans are going out there and conquering planets and doing some major operations. So How can they be together?
They're on totally separate ships, and they're
Uh-huh.
the Draco themselves have created, I believe they call them avatar bodies
Oh,
that are not biologically Draco. And they are
wow.
transferring their consciousness into these avatar bodies in order to inter- interact with 100% human.
I
They've
see.
gone to a lot of trouble to do this because they see the German military as a major asset. And
Uh-huh.
there are a lot of joint efforts, programs. It's not so much about conquering and creating more territory. It's about worlds that are trying to get their freedom. Now, if you're a loyal subject on a loyal planet, the Draco take a tax, but otherwise they treat you pretty decently. But when you
Uh-huh.
decide that you no longer want to pay that tax or serve in the military or do anything for them, then they can get pretty nasty. And
Okay.
that's where the Germans are working with the Draco, is in putting down those rebellions.
And why are the Germans so valuable to the Draco if they have all that technology and might to basically subjugate anyone they want? Why are the Germans being, human beings from Earth who are, well, generally not so, agile in space? They have to be trained more. They have to have more weapons and stuff. What's the edge for them, for the Draco, to use the Germans?
We're creative. The other races out there use what they have the way they always have, and they don't think outside the box.
Uh-huh.
We do. They have watched
Okay.
us take bits of technology from 1,000 different races and put them together and create completely new technologies. They've
Right.
watched us for the 400 years the Germans have colonies. They've watched us do some incredible things. And the Germans in space are way advanced over anything on Earth.
Mhm.
If they wanted to come to Earth and take it over, there's nothing we could do to stop them.
And why don't they?
Because they left because they were being genocided. They basically said, you don't want us, goodbye, and left. That was,
Genocided by.
well, the records I've found have been, the Jesuits have been attacking the German people since the Jesuits were first formed.
And why the Germans?
Well, it wasn't just the Germans that they attacked. If you look through history, it started with, well, if you look through the history, there was the Albigensian Crusade,
Mhm.
there was the genocide of the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, there was the genocide of the Armenians. That was what I blanked on. So if you go back through time, there have been probably at least 20 genocides that were 50 to 100 years in length that wiped out a specific population that was very high metagene.
Mhm.
And most of them have been Nordic hybrids, which would be a whole nother program.
So since you said that the Germans actually saw you as a as a freak, right,
Yes,
of nature,
that's a polite
did the
term.
Draco?
That's a polite
What?
term for how they saw us, a freak of nature.
I see.
Um,
Okay. So did the Draco then look at you as one of their own, or something like that? Did they treat you with more respect than the rest of, the humans they see?
The Draco always treated me really well, and I never saw them abuse one of the hybrids. They didn't treat us like one of them, but we were still a lesser being, but we were not mistreated. They would sometimes get frustrated with the Germans and just knock them across the room. They never did that.
So being mistreated by the Draco is basically they would what, hit you, or what do they do, and why would they do it?
Because humans are not as smart as Draco, and they get frustrated trying to talk, and they get frustrated because, in their words, we have no honor. I mean, look at American history. We've never kept a single treaty that we've ever made with anybody. We have no honor. And honor is the biggest deal to Draco. That's one of the things that the hybrids have in common with the Draco. If you dishonor one of us, we'll never forgive you. Nope, not happening. You insult my honor, you're dead to me. Or worse, I'll hunt you down and do something to humiliate you. I don't kill people. I don't do vengeance stuff other than I will humiliate you so you know how it feels.
Right. So okay. So they create these hybrids, and that means you are specifically designed to work, beside the Draco.
Yes.
What did you personally do? Did you have any missions with them? Like, did you work with them?
When I was on Mars, I was there for 25 years. The first 10, I was in Schule, where they taught me right along with their own kids for the colony. They taught us their version of history and the version of science.
The Germans did.
The Germans did. And it was taught Prussian style, where everybody said everything out loud, and if you said it wrong, you got your fingers slapped. And it was Prussian style school. We spoke Schwabian rather than Hochdeutsch. And so when I was about 19, I was put in a fighter jet as a and I was part of a unit that was called the Valkyrie. I didn't know what my name was, so they were calling me Penelope Valkyrie, my real first name and my unit name. And I was a pilot for the next 15 years. And my duties included hunting down raptor nests on Mars. So I was flying high altitude and using a computer to hunt down the Mars native raptors.
Did you report to a Draco when you would come back and stuff like that?
I reported immediately to a German Kapitan. And his boss was a Draco, and an Alpha Drac, and he was about 13 feet tall. That would be over 3 meters tall.
Yeah,
we're talking
4 meters something. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking really, really big. At least twice more.
He was a royal?
He was white, so yeah, okay. Alphas are all from Alpha Draconis. They are all the same race, and they are not the same race as the other planets in that system, but they have subjugated the rest of them. And they have a caste system where the alphas are always the boss. And they have a caste system inside their own society where the royals are a group of 4 or 5 small families that interbreed in such a way that they're not inbred.
Sounds familiar.
Very familiar. Most of the caste system countries on Earth have followed the same plan.
So you would come back, report to your captain, the Capitan, and he would then go and he would deal with the Draco, but not you. Not you guys who were like serving maybe a lower rank, right?
I was a lieutenant. I got up to a second lieutenant while I was on Mars. The U.S. Navy does not have a second lieutenant, but the Germans operate like their Luftwaffe. That was what their space was formed out of, was Luftwaffe. So they have Luftwaffe ranks. So I was told I was U.S. Navy on loan to the Germans, and that my rank with the Navy was a lieutenant, that my rank with Nachtwaffen, the space fleet, was a second lieutenant.
Did you guys have meetings with the Draco? Did they instruct you? Did they train you? Was there anything like that?
Yes. My unit was all women, and we would have meetings. It's a different calendar there, but it would be basically monthly. We would have a meeting with the Draco where we were told what our basic assignments were.
And they would, communicate telepathically to you? Is there like a meeting place, or how is it done exactly?
It was a room with a large ceiling, and he had a larger chair, and he would sit in front of us, and we would be in human-sized chairs and with tables and taking notes. And yes, the glass pads are real. And yes, I did know the human who literally spent years uploading the information to them. He had been at Langley with me. He was in the team that I was in that survived Langley and got sent to Mars. And that was his job, was to upload information to the Mars net in English, German, and Russian. And when he was on Earth afterwards, because we all get sent back, he worked for the Air Force in the Russian translation department. And
so he was a Russian-speaking...
He sounded Lithuanian. I met him real world, here and now, in 2013, and he was the agent who activated my memories. And they used him because they knew I would trust him.
Oh my God.
And then the CIA killed him in 2016. So
you would sit... you would sit in front of him and he would instruct you? You would type it in or into the glass pad, or how?
We were supposed to take notes in the glass pad. That was one of the ways that the Draco tested our understanding of what we were being told. Most of it was telepathy. He would have visuals. And sometimes the visuals were telepathic, and sometimes...
In your head, yeah.
Yes, in your head, and sometimes they were holographic. Because the Germans had holographic imagery back in the 60s.
In the colonies, right?
On Mars. On Mars.
Yeah.
At that time period, I only remember Mars. So I was officially based out of Aries Prima, or as some of the others call it, Aries Prime. And it was at first kind of a colony and a base together. It is now a military base that shared between the Germans and the Americans. So I would have never been in an American English speaking side. I was a German asset, and I was in the German colony. And so anyone who was in the American sections had a different experience than I did.
I see. So the Americans did not have the right over you to utilize you because you were handed over way back.
Exactly.
To the Germans.
I was handed over to the Germans when I was 9. So I was a German asset. And I was taught in their schools, and I was used in their program.
Wouldn't it be, like, for the Germans, wouldn't it be, like, advantageous to have you guys on the base. You could be, with the Draco. You could be with the humans. You have all this, telepathy and all these psionic stuff, and you're weaponized psionics specialist there. Why would they be so discriminative towards you? I don't understand because as I understand, they're very pragmatic. So you might be different, but you are still special for being who you are. Why did they have such a problem with that?
Because we were too much like
the Draco,
we were too much like the Germans.
and
Sometimes we were superior to the Germans. And when you think you're the master race, that can be kind of intimidating.
oh, I see.
And I would sometimes have anger control issues. And knowing that there was regeneration technology so that if I blew up someone's head, they would be brought back to life, I didn't always control that impulse real well. So they were a little afraid of me. And that was why the one commanding officer said that I was a Draco, was because he was doing things to me that were illegal and unhonorable, and I got mad and blew up his head. And
with a gun or something?
With my mind, psionic abilities. I'm weaponized. Thankfully, in the here and now on Earth, I have a firewall on that ability. So I can't do that to people here. I have
So it's fight or flight?
Electronics, but I have not harmed any people that I know of.
So it's fight or flight now for you
Yes.
to actually tap into that.
I have to actually believe that I'm going to die to be able to use that.
I remember you described an experience once that the CIA brought you over to a sacrifice ritual, and you said that I don't know what the purpose was, but you said that they were watching you closely and watching if you would react like a Draco, and if you would, they would do something. Can you describe that experience? What was that about?
That was about a myth that Draco hybrids shapeshift.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And
I was gonna ask that.
That is a myth because your physical self doesn't realign itself based on mood. You are what you are. But at that point, the CIA was checking it out, and I was at puberty, so about 13, 14 years old. And they took me to several of these rituals where there was an alpha draconian named Baphomet who was red in color, and he had made arrangements with elites. He was a adrenochrome addict, and in exchange for the elites providing him with adrenochrome, he would use technology and psionics to give them the desires of their heart. And the religion of the elites of the world is based on this.
Where was this sacrifice ritual?
It was in Los Angeles, California.
Okay.
And
You said you were 13. Did they bring you over from Mars, or how did that?
It was after Mars. It was when I had been brought back to Earth.
Oh, all right. So in this life.
In this life, here and now. And
wow, not in the 50. What you had, a 55 in back almost.
Not
right?
55 and back. It was in here and now. This life.
Yeah.
And they picked me.
Did they kidnap you? How did they do this? They basically they kidnap you somehow.
Basically kidnapped me from after school, high school. I lived in Lancaster near Los Angeles, and they picked me up after school and took me. So, and then they brought me home. I made it home somewhere around midnight. They dropped me off at the end of the driveway, and The driveway was almost a mile long. So I got in trouble. My parents were religious fanatics, and I'm this child, teenager, and they were quite angry, and I was beaten for it. So I not only had to worry about was I going to do something I didn't think was possible and end up the CIA killing me, but I had to deal with my parents when I got home. And
So they didn't use any time travel on this case. Okay.
it was just simple kidnapping, take me to this and bring me back. And they didn't bring me back to the house. They brought me back to the end of the driveway. And we were out in the country. So I've generally lived rural. And so it made it easier for them to pick me up because
Right.
no one to notice. And
What do you remember from the experience? What was it like what was the place like, and who was there, and what happened?
it was a large yard with a pool.
Oh, outside.
It was outside. It was a large, large yard that was absolutely full of people. And they were killing small children and letting the blood run over everyone. And Baphomet talked to me, and he said something about, you're not like the rest. And at the time, I brushed it off as nightmares because I had nothing to relate it to. They picked me up again when I was in my early 20s and lived in San Diego. And I refused to take part in the ceremony at all. I just backed off. And I don't remember them picking me up again after that. So they definitely got the idea that I wanted nothing to do with it. So.
And if you did, what would they do? What was their was it like an experiment on their part? What do they want?
They wanted to know if I was safe to be in the human community.
Okay.
That I was not going to kill people. I was not going to turn into a lizard. I was not going to expose their hybridization program.
And they didn't know that for sure. Like they actually modified people without knowing what would happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
They did that. They modified people without having any idea what was going to happen later on.
And they had to basically re-kidnap them back and recheck and do the research afterwards, not before. Okay.
Well, the treaty was signed in 1953. I was born in 1955, not even 2 years later. So I'm part of the very beginning of it.
I see.
So yeah, I'm test subject.
So Baphomet then is he like the head reptile for, I don't know, the Earth district or whatever? No?
No.
He's not?
He's just an addict that made a deal.
But he's one of them. He's one of the Draco.
They're ashamed of him. They say he has no honor.
Really? So he's not representing that, cult from up, top to bottom. No. Okay.
No, but he's been on, he was on Earth for thousands of years dealing with all of the elites since Sumer. And so they always presented him as a god and never knew about what he really was just a drug addict. And my understanding is the Galactic Authority finally caught up with him 2 years ago.
Right, I heard that.
And he was executed for his crimes against humanity.
I see.
So the elites are left with a religion that no longer works.
So the Draco themselves are not keen on receiving this human sacrifice, for the most part, you're saying.
No,
No?
they want.
So what do they want from Earth now? What's their biggest, like, what's the nugget here for them? If they don't want, because most people think that the reptiles, they're evil. They just want, and the elites worship them, and they're in cahoots with them. You have the Jesuits and the Vatican, and the sacrifice, and it all fits together in one. And what you're saying now, there is, basically Baphomet had his own business here,
Yep.
like a business enterprise, basically.
Baphomet
He
had his
was
own
he
business here, and
right. So they were selling him what he wanted, and he was giving them what they wanted.
mhm,
I don't know what exactly. And so, as far as the Draco go, as the group, what did they want apart from that?
they want taxes, which is a percentage of the gross national product of every country,
In the form of what? Gold?
whatever it is, gold, copper,
Okay.
food crops.
Wow.
Well, they have a huge empire, and
Right.
and not every planet is self-sufficient, and
Hmm.
they take the taxes from the planets that are and get a premium price from the planets that aren't. So they're making their version of wealth off the taxes. And as long as you're paying your taxes, you can do what you want.
Okay. And they deal with the elites on that, right? They don't
We'll
come
deal with
to.
the elites on that, yes.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So it's like everybody wants to know who's in charge of the planet. Well, it gets complicated.